Hi, Michael. Welcome to iElevate. This is our Career Labs podcast. We are super excited to be able to talk with you today about your life and your business, navigating, improving speaking skills and communication skills, which is something that a lot of people struggle with and a lot of our clients would love to improve in. If you just want to introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me, Danielle. My name is Michael Gendler. I'm a public speaking coach. I wasn't always a public speaking coach. I used to be a software engineer and project manager, even a tennis player. But today I'm a public speaking coach. And I think my entire premise of what my life is about is feeling self-expressed. I used to feel a lot of social anxiety, a lot of work, imposter syndrome, nervousness around people was something that was very present in my life for many, many years. I kind of reached a boiling point when in my early 20s of like, I don't think I'm cut out for leadership. I don't think I'm cut out for social skills. Like life is really hard and I'm struggling. And that for one reason or another led me down the path of literally Google searching how to be more confident. And that's when Google suggested that I try out public speaking. I started learning public speaking 10 or so years ago, maybe a little bit more. And since that point, what I've discovered is you can get rid of your speaking anxiety. You can get rid of nervousness before speaking. And you can actually learn to love being in the moment. Interviewing at companies is one of my favorite things in the world, even though I have my own business now, like being on podcasts. There's something about the enjoyment of communication, the enjoyment of being put on the spot that I had no idea was possible and that I didn't know was learnable. And so my entire mission is around demystifying communication and helping people understand where anxiety comes from and how to lessen it, manage it, and hopefully get rid of it.
You said you hit a boiling point in your 20s. Where were you in your life when that happened? What were you doing?
Yeah, I was at a company called Symantec. They're a cybersecurity firm. I was a software engineer just out of college. It was hard work. I think it was, I just wasn't as good at it as other people. And I found myself kind of struggling. And my manager suggested that, okay, you're not doing so great as an engineer. Try out project management. Try out being what's called a scrum master, which is basically like a technical manager. So I tried that and it was even harder because I would be the person that's responsible for giving like project updates or communicating with senior leadership on little negotiations around timelines and expectations. Basically, I'm like the talking head of the engineering team. And I found myself feeling hugely out of my league because I know the least about the code because I'm not the one coding. And I'm talking to all these big wigs and I have like the least amount of credibility. And so I feel like this giant sense of imposter syndrome. And what would happen in meetings is I would literally freeze. My body would freeze or my brain would get stuck on a word. And I would just have these internal meltdowns where I couldn't express clearly what I wanted to say. And so that created this feedback cycle of panic before meetings. And I just found myself being really stressed, chronically stressed and depressed because I was in this like unwinnable situation where I didn't feel like I was good at my job. I didn't feel like I was cut out for leadership. And ultimately, I felt like I'm just not a good communicator. And so I ended up drafting my letter of resignation and deciding like this isn't the path for me. And I would have gone through with it, but it was actually my dad who talked me out of it. And we got on a phone call and I told him everything. And he said, "It sounds like you're running away from the things that are scaring you." And that really stuck with me like, okay, that's not the mindset I want to be in. And so that's when I went on Google and started to search like how to be more confident, how to feel more happy. And one thing led to another, and I discovered public speaking.
Do you feel like that could include just speaking to one or two people as well as big groups? Do you have any tips for, because I think a lot of people even struggle just one-on-one with someone who
Totally.
they might have just met or
Yeah.
they're in an interview. What I think is really funny about the interview is it's like it should be a conversation where you're also attracting the employer to
Mm,
you. And I
mm,
tell my clients that I say, hey, the ball's also in your court. You're vetting if this company is the right company for you.
yeah.
Put a little power back in into your sales. Tell me if you think that's also public speaking one-on-one versus when I think of public speaking, I'm thinking of a big audience.
Absolutely. And I thought the same thing. And that's what most people train is they'll go into a Toastmasters and they'll have 15 people in the audience and they practice giving speeches. What I learned through my experience is that public speaking, that phrase has why do people even pursue it? It's because they're scared of it. And so I think of public speaking as any type of speaking where you feel a sense of nervousness or pressure. And for some people, that's a stage or that's being in front of your team. For me, it was being at a barbecue with my neighbors or being at a party where my friend invited me, but they also invited like 30 other people that I don't know. And my friend is the host. So they're busy the whole night. And now I'm like stuck in this party where I don't know anyone. That to me is public speaking. It's basically any time I feel pressure or self-consciousness or nervousness. And for sure, job interviews fall into that category. And so because of that, really when we study how do you improve your communication skills, a big part of that focus is about learning how do you respond to pressure? How do you navigate scenarios where, because all of us are great speakers at the core. We have certain people in our lives. You're probably a person in very many people's lives where they just feel comfortable talking to you. And there's like an ease and a naturalness, and there's not so much self-consciousness. You probably have people in your life, like a close friend or a relative, where it's just, you even say like you get lost in conversation because you disappear into it, you know, everything flows. So we all have moments where conversation goes pretty smoothly. And then we all have moments where it feels like the hardest thing in the world, where it's clunky and I don't feel good about it. And so the question is like, how do I access that state of comfort that I already know I can with some select people? How do I build that same comfort in the situations that are less familiar to me? And when we study that question, we realize, oh, it's all about how we handle pressure, how we approach nervousness, and it's a lot of the mindsets and habits that determine how we feel around other people.
Do you have a routine that works really well for you before you get on to a call like this, say, or if you had to talk in front of a larger audience? Like, do you structure your day differently, or do you feel like you've kind of gotten it down now where you don't need to worry so much about preparing for a call or speaking?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer in both ways. So personally for me, I don't have any routine because I don't place great importance on any one particular opportunity. That takes time to develop, and that might not be a mindset for everybody. But what I mean is I really appreciate being in this conversation and the opportunity to share a message, but I don't want to hype it up in a way that will make me nervous. And I read in a book once, it's called Transurfing Reality, which is like a weird sort of mystical, how does the world work type of book. It's not for everyone either, but one of the ideas shared in that book, how do you balance going for your dreams and taking on giant opportunities with the feelings of nervousness and anxiety and the stress of it all? And so the kind of philosophy of that book is, can you find a way to care without worrying? Anytime you're worrying, it's because you're caring too much. You're placing too much importance on this one thing. And it reminds me of the parable of the Chinese farmer who, I don't know if you've heard of it, but essentially it's like a famous ancient little story where there's a Chinese farmer and his son breaks his leg one day because he falls off his horse. And the neighbor comes up to the farmer and says, what happened? And the farmer says, oh, my son broke his leg. And the neighbor's like, oh, that's such bad luck. And the farmer's like, oh, I don't know. We'll see. And then the next day, the military comes and they're ready to draft the son into the army. But they see that the son has this cast on his leg and the leg's broken. And so he doesn't get drafted. And the neighbor comes by and goes, oh my God, such good fortune, such good luck. And the farmer's like, I don't know. We'll see. And the parable continues, but the larger principle is like, we don't know if, and getting any one job is, in my life, I've gotten certain jobs that made me less happy. I've had difficult breakups in my life that were terrible and then were the best thing that ever happened to me. So we never really know how one event, whether it's good or bad. So I think this philosophy of like over esteeming it, making it really important. I have to get this job. I want them to really like me, feels a little bit like we're just creating extra pressure where we don't really need it to be. So for myself, I try to keep everything on more of a level playing field of like, oh, I'm going to have a great conversation with Danielle and I hope it goes well, but I'm really just going to focus on being present, doing the best that I can. And regardless of how it goes, I'm going to not worry too much about it.
That art of letting go shapes around our larger conversation that we talk a lot with clients about
Okay.
resilience. You know, resilience is bouncing back better, right? And
Mm,
like the faith piece of I'm going to be okay no matter what, because it's not
yeah.
always about the outcome that you craft in your head or the expectation that you want, because life never goes that way.
Yes.
So it's like about letting go of control. And I think there is that element in speaking, right? Is like letting go of control, you know, and as we're talking about this, like this is stuff that I need to work on. Like we all have to work on, right? It's like that pressure, I think it's internal pressure. It's, I need to do this. I need to ensure that I've got this done. I've got to do that. And those thoughts bouncing back in your head are totally taking you out of the present
Mm,
moment. What are some tips that you have for first generating? Because I think behavior change starts with self-awareness. So how can you increase awareness to this type of incessant chatter that's in your
mm,
head that's creating that internal pressure? And I think that leads to anxiety. Like, how can we start to become more aware?
for most people, what we find is whenever they come train with us at Ultra Speaking, most people have reached a point of like, I'm tired of going into these social events or these work events and feeling this like sense of dread and this sense of resistance, and then also feeling disappointed afterwards. So I say this because most people are familiar and aware of that voice. In fact, they're too aware of it. It's kind of ruling their
Mm,
life when it comes to speaking, when it comes to pressure. One of the first things that we focus on in the training is a really interesting habit. It's going to be kind of unintuitive to most people at first, but there's a method to it. And that habit is called staying in character. It comes from a theater term, but what it really means is no matter how nervous you feel, no matter how much anxiety and discomfort you're experiencing before speaking and even as you're speaking, stay in character, meaning keep your composure. What that really looks like is, well, I'll tell you what the opposite looks like. Breaking character might look like going on a podcast and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't really prepare very much, so bear with me." Or it might be this feeling of oh, I'm talking too much, and you might say, "Oh, I'm rambling right now. I'm so sorry. Sorry about that." Or it might be as subtle as ending your sentence with a little bit of a lack of confidence. So you might say something, and then towards the end, you might go and yeah. So I guess that's yeah. It's like this. All these little tiny feelings of insecurity are almost leaking because we're so uncomfortable with the feeling of I don't think I'm doing a good job right now, and I don't feel good in my body. When we do that, we're essentially breaking character. We're communicating to others that I don't feel good. I don't think highly of myself. And our defense mechanisms kick in, self confidence. We need to believe that we're actually doing fine. And the reality, Danielle, is that most people are doing fine on the outside. You
hmm
know how, like, if you ever seen a theater performance and you're watching, like, your friend is in high school, was part of drama. So you go and you watch their play. And then afterwards, everyone's going up to them and going, "You did such a great job. That was amazing." My girlfriend in high school used to do plays. What I was fascinated by is every time I'd go and say, "Hey, you did such a great job," she would say, oh my God, it was a disaster. I forgot my line here. This other person mixed up their lines, and we had to, and you realize the whole internal world of the play was super chaotic. But from the outside, we had no idea what the lines were. So we feel like, wow, this was perfect. And speaking is the same way. On the outside, it looks like this person has it all together. On the inside, it's always going to feel messy because we're kind of improvising and stumbling along the way. So the habit of staying in character is essentially saying, look, if you don't shoot yourself in the foot, if you don't leak your insecurities and apologize and admit you're nervous, if you just maintain composure, then what's going to happen is you're going to come across as confident by default. People will even reflect to you, wow, you seem very composed. You come across as confident. If you ask for feedback, they'll say, oh, yeah, you seem normal. You seemed fine. And that's going to do a big puzzle in your brain because you felt nervous, but you came across as confident. And that's the first ingredient for us to start to rewire our reality and go, okay, maybe how I feel isn't identical to what people see. And if that's the case, then that's really good news, because what we've discovered is most people appear confident by default. And the only way that they appear unconfident is when they break character and show deliberately, oh, I'm nervous. I'm not feeling comfortable right now. But if they avoid that temptation, suddenly, yeah, your default is you look confident. And pretty soon when you start getting enough of that feedback, you'll start to internalize it and believe it.
Yeah, what you believe really does affect reality over time. So
Absolutely.
fascinating. Wow. Okay, so it's almost like breaking the fourth wall. So we're trying to maintain our composure and our character despite the internal chaos.
Another way of putting that is you're going to feel the chaos, especially at the beginning. Don't focus on it. Don't draw attention to it. Don't make it bigger in your head by giving it your focus. Keep speaking. Keep going. Reorient back on it's why they say in regular anxiety, when you feel you have a panic attack coming on, I used to have a lot of those. They would give you advice like hold an ice cube, for example. The idea there is take your focus off of the panic attack, off of the internal discomfort, and anchor yourself in something else, something outside of your body, like the feeling of cold ice. So similarly, when you're feeling nervous or anxious, speaking to somebody, the more you focus on it, the bigger it's going to grow. So instead, shift your focus to the other person, look at their eyes, try to really listen to what they're saying, focus on what you're saying, just draw attention away from the nervousness, and it'll lessen with time.
I used to do some rock climbing, and what
Okay.
I find really interesting about rock climbing is you're up 8 feet off the ground, 10 feet off the ground, and you're on these holds. And everything's fine when you're just focused on the hold and like
Yeah.
your next hold. But as soon as you can't figure out what hold to grasp onto next,
Yes.
then the immediate next thought is, oh shit. And then
Yeah.
it's, I'm really high off the ground. I'm gonna fall, right? Like the I'm
Oh.
gonna fall is where that's when you get into trouble. Versus if you stay focused on the moment of, okay, this hold, it doesn't matter if you're 10 feet off the ground or you're 50 feet off the ground, you're not going to fall. And I think that's what's really interesting. If you've ever seen those free soloing rock artists, like what's going on in their head, I
Yeah.
almost feel like it's a very well-trained discipline of thought of shifting away from the internal dialogue that's going to cause the fall and into the moment presence. So that like art shifting, right? From hearing what you're talking about, it seems as though that shift can be trained. How long do you think it might take somebody with practice to stay in character and start to shift into that character over time?
I think it takes less than a year. And I don't know what
Well,
people expect. Like maybe they want a 2 week solution,
we got a
but
12-week program.
a 12-week program. Yeah. It takes a year, less than a year. But to start feeling improvement, to really start feeling like, oh, I'm changing, I think it takes about a month of practice. To really feel like you're making progress, what needs to happen? Well, you need to essentially be about 10, 20 feet off the ground, a point that scares you. Feel a moment of, uh-oh, I don't know how to go to the next foothold or handhold. Feel that moment of panic. And essentially, maybe in your first try, you really panic and you go, take me down, I don't like this. Maybe in your second panic, you're like, oh, this is feeling uncomfortable. I'm going to try for it. No, I'm not going to try for it. Maybe in your third instance, you actually try to reach and you find a way, but you fail and you fall. Of course, you're supported by a rope, but that's a huge victory because you actually tried to go for something that was scary instead of backing away. By your fourth, fifth, or sixth time, what happens is you go, okay, I've been here before. I'm safe. I'm supported. Rather than feeling the force of the panic, okay, let me actually recollect myself and think strategically. What should I do here? And in that moment, something else happens. Now you have some headspace that you didn't have the first time because you're not so panicked. Once you're able to get that feedback loop of, wow, it was scary, but I was familiar with it and I figured out where to go next. That's when everything changes. That's when we go, all right, well, maybe let's, instead of 10 feet, let's try 15 feet. Or in fact, let's try an even harder handhold for this next one, or harder foothold. But the purpose is not to make the next step. It's just to be in that situation and soothe yourself and say, hey, I'm in trouble, but I got this. I'm going to be okay. Stay composed. So we're really mindset training in this example. We're really putting ourselves in sort of uncomfortable situations, but notice that they're not dangerous situations because you're clearly in a climbing gym. You're in a supported environment. That's the difference. And so when it comes to training your speaking, I would say it's the same exact thing. Find a supportive environment where you feel a sense of safety. Whether you stumble or don't stumble, no one's going to judge you. Everyone's there for the same purpose. And practice the scenarios that are a little bit uncomfortable. Like at Ultra Speaking, we practice blanking. We literally try to put you in a state where you don't know what to say next, because that's the thing that everybody is scared of. So let's learn to feel comfortable in it and let's learn to navigate it. And suddenly, after a few instances, it's not so scary anymore. And we know if I do blank, I have some tools and techniques to get myself out of there.
I have moments where I blank when I'm with my clients or as a therapist, and it's okay, now what? That pause, though, is like this really cool liminal space where there's a lot of potentiality for transformation. And people like to rush through silence. We live in a world that's full of noise and constant data, and anxiety is just a huge problem right now. Silence makes people really uncomfortable, but it used to be a more natural state for people, I believe. I actually think that in silence, that's like I created this company when I had COVID. When you're sitting and you've got time, that's when the best stuff happens. This public speaking, anxiety, mindset training, communication skills, it's a big problem for people. Entrepreneurs really love problems. So my clients, a lot of times, they come to me and they're like, I'm really stuck. I'm blanking on my career path. I don't know what to do for a career. And it's like, well, what's your biggest problem right now besides getting a job? What are some other challenges you're facing? Is one of those challenges figure outable for more than just you? Because that could be something that you could brand around and solve. Or if you have a special passion or a special niche, someone once told me, don't just follow your passion, but follow your talents and skills. If you speak on something you're excited about, you're talented with, you've got skill in, or if you're passionate about it, I think that helps that blank. It's when we're speaking about something we just don't love or we don't like that I think it starts to show. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I once had a mentor tell me that your greatest fears can become your greatest gifts. And I think that's that was really true for me. There's like a parallel quote that you teach best what you need to learn most. If you are feeling a sense of stuckness, or there's something in your life that you're not good at or that you can't figure out, that's the seed of a great potential. Because if you can figure this out for yourself, and I genuinely believe that most people can learn anything if they give themselves enough time and have the right mindset. So if you're able to stick with something and pursue it, I think the secret ingredient there is you have to really want it. For me, I only really want the things that are causing pain in my life. So I really want my
Mm.
back pain to go away. So fine, I am going to go and do the physical therapy exercises, and I am going to read the books about how back pain works, and I am going to sign up for the gym, but only because it hurts. And I am going to go work on my public speaking because I really am tired of feeling I'm not good enough or worthy enough. And I'm sick of that. So I am going to
Mm.
do something about it. With that mindset, I feel like I've always been a believer of tackling the things that I'm bad at because they caused me so much pain. And it just so happened that the more that I learned about them and studied them and got better at them, the more I realized, like, oh, wow, I understand them in a way that when I was learning, it wasn't really well explained because nobody could really connect with my particular problem and how I was blocked on it. If you're a bad dancer and suddenly you take dance lessons and then 5 years later you feel like, wow, I love dancing. You have a whole world of men who are self-conscious about dancing who could use your journey and your insights, and I think it makes you really well equipped to inspire.
Thank you for sharing all these insights. It also helped me as well. Tell us a little bit more about the structure to your program that you coach around and what you walk people through. Some of our clients will most likely be doing some work with you over the next few months or couple years.
Yeah, so it's called Ultra Speaking, and we built a course around speaking anxiety. I was one of the people that had this giant blocker in my way. And so I studied it from a lot of angles and tried to figure out, like, what is it that actually helped me feel more at ease in my life? Why is it that I'm able to show up to interviews and to speeches and all that and feel great, especially social events? I used to feel so terrible. Why is it that I feel fine, good? That's what the course is really centered around. What's the stuff that actually works? And for me, that comes down to a few different modules. And the crux of it is confidence. How do you build confidence in a way that's sustainable, that's lasting? For most people, that means it has to come from a source within. It can't be a confidence that's like, oh, if I'm well prepared, I'm confident. That means that, okay, well, that means now you have to prepare for everything all the time. Otherwise, you won't feel confident. So that's not a lasting confidence. That's a conditional confidence. We want
Mm.
to build a sense of unconditional confidence and ease in speaking, which is what the course is really about. How it works is it puts you in these rock climbing situations. You go into small breakout rooms of 3 students and you play these games. We call them rock climbing games, but really they're speaking games that put you in different interesting scenarios. In week 1, we might have you start sentences out loud, but not know how to finish them. So we'll only give you the start of a sentence, and your job is to finish it on the fly because you're building trust in your brain's natural ability to do this. In week 2, we might play with your dynamism, with your voice, with your energy to show that, like, oh, actually, you can come across as more engaging just by being in it a little bit more. Raise your energy a little bit, like get some emotion in there, and people can do
Mhm.
this naturally. That's the beautiful part. We all have these ingredients within us. And then in week 3, we would practice the most important skill, the skill you mentioned that we didn't get to talk too much about, which is silence. The ability to avoid rushing, breathe properly, and take your time. And from that silence, from that ability to pause, comes a real solid sense of groundedness. It's the antidote to blanking, stumbling, rambling. Whenever something's feeling wrong, if you build the habit of pausing, you'll always have something else to say. You'll never run out of things to say. So
Mm.
we're essentially trying to find
Cool.
the most common pitfalls in speaking. We call it turbulence. All the little ingredients like rambling, not knowing what to say, getting put on the spot, all those little moments that send a slight signal of panic to people. And we built a course saying, hey, let's figure out what to do in each one of those, and we'll walk you through it. But more importantly, you'll practice it, and you'll practice in a group of supportive people and coaches who will guide you and say, all right, here's what you did great. And next time, and they'll give you some feedback, maybe stay in character. or maybe slow down a little bit, or maybe it's just a little reminder to trust yourself. You got this. And so over the 30-day course, most people, if not all people, feel a sense of genuine improvement. And that's because we're not trying to learn new skills as much as we're trying to uncover something that we already have inside of us, this natural ability to speak, and simply learn how to access that feeling in moments where we are used to feeling more pressure or more panic. We're learning how to unlock the confidence from within.
So many good insights from creating headspace to the rock climbing, desensitization to stress, learning how we cope with stress, and increasing self-awareness by increasing understanding of ourselves.
Yeah, well put.
Thank you, Michael. Really a pleasure to hang out with you today, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Danielle.